So for those of you that are not aware, I work with the Texas Historical Commission, and we opened the new $12.5 million facility just down the road on the Brazos River back in April. So I'm not going to talk a lot about history today. We'll do a little trivia just for kicks to give you a sense of why Austin County is now the home to what is essentially a world-class museum. If you're not familiar with it, I want to help you in that process, both for you personally and for your clients, because it's certainly it's an unusual addition to a county of this size, which our agency would say, of course, history's history. So you go where the story is. If you don't know the story, a couple of things about the fall I want to share with you. We do active archaeology in the month of October, now that we have a staff archaeologist on board. So we'll be doing some excavation over the next 3 to 4 weeks. And if that's something you have an interest in, check in with me. I'll kind of let you know what's going on. In the future, we'll do more exciting archaeology. This year we're doing what in our lexicon we call clearance archaeology. We want to do some continued improvements to the site. It may be a surprise for you to hear that we're not done with the museum. There's several other additions that are still in the works, that part of them are still being funded, but that construction proceeds, and some of that requires archaeological clearance by law. So that's what we're going to be doing this fall, is looking at some of the places we want to improve. We also, if you're not aware, local stakeholders who enjoy history and have had an interest in Stephen F. Austin's footprint on this county have been celebrating his birthday for almost 100 years at the State Historic Site. So we'll be having that event the first Saturday in November. If you're not on a deer lease somewhere, think about coming out and joining us on Saturday, November 3rd. We expect there'll be probably 300 to 500 people. The days of museum events bringing in 10,000, like a place I used to work, are pretty much over, I think. Too many electrical devices, too many things going on in your life. So real quickly, who's been to the museum? Yes. Excellent. I brought a prize for you today. Thanks for coming. Sorry, Greg, I want to move around on you a little bit. Show me again? Yeah. Oh, I know Mary Ann's been out there several times. Give that to somebody who needs to come. Come back. Give that to one of your professors. Thank you. So that means the rest of you haven't found time, which is not that surprising. It's hard to be a tourist where you live, and we understand that in terms of how history museums operate. By the same token, of the roughly 7,000 visitors we've had since we opened, which is not great. We'd like to have better visitation than we currently have. One of our challenges is, as was said for 75 years before the museum opened, we're the best kept history story related to the founding of Texas and the Texas Revolution. And just building a museum doesn't change that. So we still need your help and your interest, if you have it, in promoting this sort of stuff. So I want to take away the excuse for those of you that haven't been to the museum. This is a pass for 2 people. Come out. If you let me know you're coming, we might do something a little more special, or at least give you a little whirlwind that talks more about how we're operating and what we think we can be to your community. So let's talk real quick about the business side of this. We have a meeting space. We have private event facilities. Tony is the person that coordinates those, and I encourage you to ask her about things we might be able to do for you or with you. Something that we want to offer to the chamber, we've been long-standing members, and part of my own trivia, not that it matter a lot to you all, but I've worked with Peggy Spradley for 20 years because of her work in the heritage tourism field. Peggy was my first boss when I told my wife, I think I'm going to do something crazy and go to work for a museum. And Peggy was the chamber, she was the chamber president, but she was also the board president for the program I was working on at that time. She's always double and triple and quadruple dipped in terms of her nonprofit leadership. So I've known Peggy forever, and we were both excited to have a chance to work together a little more formally when I came here. But of those roughly 7,000 visitors that have found us so far, we aren't doing tourism business. Those are people that have been watching this project. Those are people who live relatively locally or regionally. Katie's a big market for us, who knew the museum was coming and prioritized getting out to see it. And that's great. The one thing we're doing to keep those people and other locals interested is we do have a temporary gallery space that we'll turn over about twice a year. So if, when I mentioned archaeology a moment ago, that was of interest to you, we'll be hosting a really exquisite archaeology exhibit next spring. It'll install in February. This has to do with a story that's often referred to in the history circles as the Sea of Mud. If that means nothing to you, I'll tell you it's a really cool story about the Mexican Army retreat from Texas after the loss at San Jacinto. The guy that did this archaeology 20 years ago is our guest curator. He's written a book about it. He'll be very active in the installation, so you'll have a chance to see him speak if you have that interest. He was a pediatrician by day, archaeologist by weekend for most of his life at the hospital in Wharton. And kept telling me for years, Greg would say, as soon as I retire, you got me. Well, he's retired, so we're going to pull this all together. The exhibit is housed at Texas A&M, and we're working with them to bring it down for this installation. So we'll have it for about 6 months. So 2 quick things, and then we'll get into the trivia, and I want to give away a few other things. If you don't know the story of San Felipe, you're not alone at all. Don't feel embarrassed. It's not a story that's well known. The other historic sites all tend to have seminal moments, the ones that are connected to this story, the Texas Revolution sites. They all have these seminal moments where something crazy happened. We fought over a cannon. We lost a battle. We had another terrible loss. We won a battle at San Jacinto. We declared independence. Those are all the big things that Texans connect to. What your local story is 13 years of everybody who was at all those other places talking about what's going well and what's not, living in Mexican Texas, dealing with the various issues they had with politics and with immigration and with cultural conflict. It sounds a lot like the kind of things that we have going on in our world today, right? That's the role museums have. So if you're not a museum goer, don't feel bad about that either. There's an informal statistic in Texas that I absolutely subscribe to. When we do outreach for 4th grade classes, that's the first Texas history curriculum in public schools, 4th graders are 9 years old. On average, about 1 out of every 4th grade classroom is a self-identified history nerd. I tell my volunteers when they go do these programs, find that kid. It's the only thing that's going to keep you sane for the next 60 minutes. Find that kid and have a moment with them. It's ironic, we're going to see 10 or 15,000 school kids a year at this museum. Most of them are going to come by force. Most of them are going to come not particularly excited to be there. And some of them are going to be downright disruptive while they're there because they're bored and they're not interested and history's not their thing. We've tried to do things. If you come and visit the museum, I think you're going to be shocked by the level of modernity, by the multimedia and the graphic design and the interactives that we've installed. And that's pretty much by force for us. We are what the museum world calls object poor. We don't have a whole lot of really cool stuff. We do have cool stuff, don't get me wrong, but it's not chock full. We're not wall-to-wall objects, which in the current market may not be a bad thing. There's a suggestion that the youth of the world aren't looking at old stuff as exciting. I would say I think the jury's out. When we get teenagers in, we usually have some stuff we can get them to put the phone down for, and I think that's a good thing. That's a way we can all take a pause and relax. So I'm going to assume, when I give you that statistic of roughly 1 out of 23 being a history nerd, that I'm the one in this group, right? So I certainly had that self-identification. So no pressure on you to be one, but if you are, well, shame on you, get out and see us. If you're not, if you're the parent or grandparent of one of those nerds, you're going to want to bring them to this place. We're having very good experiences. But if you're not a history nerd at all, and you just have an interest in where you are and why you are, understand that because of the scope of this story, and we joked internally working on it, the risk we're taking is telling a substantive story with a lot of nuance in it. And I don't mean to be critical, because we work very closely with these sites. The Alamo story is not a subtle, nuanced story. San Jacinto is not a subtle, nuanced story. The Declaration of Independence is not a subtle, nuanced story. And that's what Texans have grown up on and liked. And they don't even remember all of that real well. One of our great complications as relates to Washington on the Brazos, we're the place where the government said we're not leaving Mexico, but we're going to change governments and we're going to fight to do it. Texans don't know that story. They're clueless that that ever occurred in their history. So that's a challenge that we have to bring together. Speaking of which, I thought it was kind of fitting. Today is a very prominent day in that Texas Revolution cycle. Does anybody know what today is as an anniversary? October 2nd. Anyway. Take a chance. You may know it by bumper sticker. That's about the most substantive place it lives these days. Sorry. It's not Goliad, but you are so close, Marianne. It is Gonzales, thank you. So, Gonzales, this is the anniversary of the Come and Take It incident, which most Texans today know by an AK-47 sticker on the back of their truck, as opposed to anything really related to what happened at Gonzales in 1835. Gonzales kind of gets short shrift, and I don't want to be critical of it. Like any of these wonderful, mythic, heroic history stories, Gonzales is not the first, but we talk about it that way, and there's reason to. There are some really interesting things that happened as relates to the Revolution because of the Gonzales story. There's a lot better stories that play out. So I have 2 other books I want to give away real quick, and the questions I decided to come up with were, I'm wearing an Alamo Messenger pin today. This is a pin that the Alamo makes to give to 10-year-olds. So those of us that are history nerds from age 10 tend to be kind of reverted in some ways. So I'm thrilled to have my Alamo Messenger pin. But I'm wearing it specifically because it has an association for me to our site. Does anybody know who the second most famous resident of the town 2 miles from here in 1830 to 36 might have been? I'm assuming we're all in agreement that Stephen F. Austin is the most famous of them. Does anybody know the second most famous? You two can't play, you can't play. Well, I gave you a hint because I'm wearing an Alamo pin. So let's assume it's one of 3 men.
Davy Crockett.
It is not Davy Crockett, and shame on you for listening to Lisa, who's going to lead you astray. In fact, I often tell people when we play History Parlor trivia, Davy Crockett's the only prominent Texan of this era that I can't tell you came to San Felipe. I don't believe he did. Pretty much everybody else, if you want to play this game sometime, I can put in town. I can make them be there, including Santa Ana, who's a very prominent player in the San Felipe story. So she's lopped off Davy Crockett for you. That leaves 2. You didn't all sleep through 7th grade Texas history, assuming you were here. Wow, this is harder than I thought. You all really need to get to the museum kind of stat. All right, she's given you the 2 wrong answers. So we are down to the only one of the Alamo trilogy, the Mount Rushmore of the Alamo who lived at San Felipe. His name is William Barrett Travis. So William Travis, who's the commander. Thanks. So I'm going to aid the college, to aid the college, I'm going to give this book to Lisa after her epic fails on coming up with that trip.
I knew Alamo people.
You did. That's good.
Epic.
So the reason the Alamo pin means something to me is that William Barrett Travis, maybe this will get us there in the pop culture ranks. There was a news article, was that 3 weeks ago, Tony? When did this happen? The State Board of Education, if anybody pays attention and cares, made a decision that Travis's letter from the Alamo, often learned by 4th and 7th graders as the victory or death letter because of how he signed the letter, that would no longer be part of standing curriculum for 7th grade Texas history classes. And it caused a bit of an uproar. Your state senator fired off the most thoughtful response in the public realm. Yeah. It was very good. She did a nice job of talking about it, talking about both the challenges teachers face with limited resources and limited time, but also the importance of telling this particular story. So I thought it was very well done. So obviously none of you know that William Travis, by messenger, sent that victory or death letter to the Brazos River right here. And the curator of the Alamo often tells people, I go to their site every year on February 24th. That's the anniversary of the writing of the letter. And so every year we make an appearance there, and they usually do school programs and stuff. And their curator, whom I've had the privilege to know for 20 years, has started telling people, and he's been a great supporter of ours, although he's not quite, I'm still educating the curator of the Alamo. This is, don't feel bad, like I said. He said last year, William Travis's letter could not build an army to save the Alamo. That's true. And if you've never seen the letter, well, again, come to the museum. William Travis predicts in this letter, 2 weeks before the fall of the Alamo, exactly what's going to happen at the Alamo. He basically says, we need resources, we need guns, we need men, and if we don't get them, we're all going to die here fighting for your freedom. That's what's going to happen, which is what happens. That letter, again, the curator says that letter didn't build Travis's defense army, but it did build the army that Sam Houston wins the Texas Revolution with. To which I've said to Bruce, that's almost right. That is just so close to right, it's scary. But nobody saw Travis's letter. Maybe 6 or 10 people held it in their hand in the spring of 1836. But what happened when it got here is the most famous printer in Texas history, who ran a newspaper during the Texas Revolution that almost exactly matches the life of the Revolution, 6 months of running a newspaper. He turned it into a document. He made a broadside document, 1,000 copies of it. And those 1,000 copies that got sent out from this place to people living in what was then immigrant Mexican Texas, that's what motivated Sam Houston's army. That's why you had people at Gonzales who eventually would fight at San Jacinto. So I didn't mention his name because that's my last trivia. And I'm a little worried about this one because this was going to be the hard one. And we've already had a rough outing on the history front. So does anybody drink milk? Have kids that drink milk? Does anybody remember Elsie the cow?
I do.
No, you kids are out of it. I'm looking at you because you're my one glimmer of history nerd. Elsie the cow is a loss on everybody. So it's a milk company that starts with the name B. That's the one, Borden. So Gail Borden, 20 years before he invented condensed milk, Gail Borden was running a newspaper here at San Felipe de Austin. It printed every document that any of you can imagine related to the Texas Revolution, including the Texas Declaration of Independence. There was no print shop at Washington. So even though the government moved, the function of government in some ways stayed here in terms of printing and getting people informed. So that's a really fascinating story for us. I'll end on one last history nerdy moment. As we do archaeology, one of the true home runs that we have hit, and we'll hit a lot more as we do more active archaeology, but right now, the thing that we found that is probably the coolest because it is so diagnostic is lead type, set type, at a place where we expected a print shop to be. I wish I could tell you it was Gail Borden's print shop, but believe it or not, there was somebody here before Borden came and ran a newspaper, and it's his site that we have found actually in 2 locations. There's a guy named Godwin Cotton. That's way more nerdiness and trivia than you need to know. But the fact that we could go to the places where he thought he was making a newspaper and printing documents to support Stephen F. Austin's land office and find set type and say, okay, that's exactly what's going on here. Even better for us, we know where he bought it. We can match it by font. We can look at it in his newspaper and tell you this is what he's doing with it. This is what's going on. Those are things, we almost felt bad that that happened so early, because there's very few things we'll find that will be that diagnostic going forward. I have a display related to William Travis and the burning of the town. If you didn't know that story, I better just save it for your visit. But the town of San Felipe was destroyed in 1836, which is why we don't give tours of it today and why we needed a $12.5 million museum. But at the end of the day, the Travis case that we have has a beautiful burned artifact in it. Burned, we presume, from the burning of the town. And it's a bone-faced domino that was found in the footprint of his law office. That's the kind of stuff we're going to have to diagnose going forward. I'm not going to find William Travis's ring with his initials on it. I'm not going to find something that screams lawyer. I'm not going to find something that says Stephen F. Austin was here. So the print type was a really unusual thing. The last thing I want to give to everybody along with your passes is a reprint of one of Gail Borden's newspapers, which I chose very deliberately. This is the first issue of the Telegraph and Texas Register, which was the name of the paper, which was printed on October the 10th. So, that's as close as I can get to our day today. But more importantly, he's telling the story of what happened on October 2nd, which we've now established was the come and take it day. I'll give you these extras if you need them for kids or others. So enjoy that. The ads are on the back page. If you're not familiar with 19th century newspapers, they're a little strange. They're an odd beast. All the important news is inside. I didn't give you one? Look at that. Marion's so nice to us. So all of the big news of the day is inside. So you're going to have to search a little bit to find the story of Come and Take It. Like I said, this paper ran for 6 months, and since I've told you the beginning, I'll end on the end of its story. Gail Borden made an assumption that it would be impossible to evacuate a 1,500-pound press and set type and all the things that you need to run a print shop in 1836. So initially in the Revolution, he keeps talking about in his paper how he assumes someone will set up a print shop at a place like Washington to serve the government, or at a place along the coast to serve the immigrants who are trying to flee. And that never happens. So in March of 1836, he gets enough help to get his press from a mile away from the state park over here, hoisted to the Brazos River, carried across the Brazos River, which was at flood stage, and then loaded into a wagon and taken to the town of Harrisburg, where 1 week later, Santa Anna's advanced forces capture that press and throw it in Buffalo Bayou. So it ended its life and its service to the Texas Revolution 1 week before the Battle of San Jacinto. So anyway, that's just a little glimpse of some of the stories you can come learn. The 3 ways that we can help you. If you're in a client-based business and you have clients, even if they live here, who are not familiar with the history and culture of this place, there's a real easy place to get them caught up, and I encourage you to take advantage of it. I want to assure you, even if these are personal connections, your friends and family, we don't act like tourists where we live. So your value to us is when you do have tourists coming to see you. When your family comes for Thanksgiving and says, what the heck are we going to do on shopping Friday? We don't want to shop all day. We're open every day of the year, except Thanksgiving and Christmas and that kind of stuff. So we're a great place for you to have those encouragements, and I can assure you your friends, family, and professional contacts are going to be impressed with this recommendation. We're hearing nothing but positive stuff about the museum and its operation right now. We're just not hearing it from enough people. So help us on that front, we'll help you. On the meeting front, did I already say this, Tony? Any of you that want to host a meeting, the deal I will offer to chamber members, we have meeting space. We can do it before or after hours if you need something private that you want to do in the evening or whatever. But the space is separate from our main operations. So you can have a meeting there midday that's not impacted by our other business, and we encourage you to do that. If you have local meetings where it's useful to you to get away from your facilities just to stay focused or do whatever, get with Tony, and what I will offer to you in exchange for 45 minutes of your time to learn a little bit about the history of the place, come have a 2 or 3 hour free meeting in one of our facilities. Come do it. We'll set you up. We'll get you the tech support you need. We'll make sure that works. What I ask you to do is either at the corporate level, or if you have to, pocket it out of your employees or your clients, buy a reduced price ticket from us and let us do about a 45-minute tour of the museum as part of your experience. I can assure you it'll be a good exclamation to your meeting, particularly if you're serving clients. It'll work very well. So stay in touch with us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Bryan. A couple of quick questions.
Sure.
What are the hours of the museum?
The museum's, I'm sorry.
Reaching out to the schools. In Austin County especially. I'm thinking of, we have a Weston Elementary.
Yes, and we are aware, we are tagging all the local schools. This is going to be a year where our school programming kind of grows, and fall, here's the reality of school field trips. Schools that are committed to field tripping in the fall are a small percentage of schools. They're also much more committed to benefiting their learning process than schools that, like everyone else, field trip in April and May. So there's been a real crunch in the field trip world because schools are reducing the number of days they're willing to field trip. And if they come in April and May, no offense, you know, I'm sure some of you are parents that go out on these field trips as chaperones or whatever. Schools that make that deal, they're not doing school stuff. They're celebrating the end of the school year. It's a very different experience. Not that we aren't happy to have it, not that we don't throw some history at those kids in April and May and hope something sticks, because that's certainly our business, but they're not coming to learn much of nothing. They're coming to enjoy the fact that they survived the school year and the principal's gonna let us off campus. So the weird, sad reality is, your administrators feel like they have to jump through a cultural hoop. What they ought to do with most of those kids in April and May is send them to a sports field and have a big cookout and play some soccer and get out some energy and talk about how great it was to be a 7th grader. What the administrator says is, oh no, you can't do that. You got to go have a real trip. Well, okay. So we have a fake trip at a place that they should have gone in the fall. It'll be a slow build-up, but we're reaching out to all the local schools. We are hoping by the end of this year, I don't know how it's going to play out this year, Mary, but we're hopeful that going forward, our friends and or other local sponsors will allow us to subsidize Austin County schools and maybe a few just on the periphery who are connected to this story. So that may happen this year. It'll certainly happen, I think, going forward. And we want to serve the districts in ways that aren't just field trip based. We do outreach programming. We want to serve their kids who are looking for special projects to do for a high school class, whatever. We have plenty of things to share. To Vince's question, we're open 9 to 5 every day. Including Sundays. People get confused. You can't be in the tourism business and be closed on Sunday. It just doesn't work. That's not the way it's not the way the tourism world works anymore. We need to be seeing 50 to 70,000 visitors over the next couple of few years. So we've got a little time to build up to it. We're not going to hit that this year, but it may surprise you to know the state park, 1.5 miles away from me, before all the recent crazy flooding that has shut them down significant parts of the last 3 years, they were seeing 60,000 visitors a year. They're one of the hidden gems in the state park system. What they really are, and it's an interesting dynamic that we're exploring too, they're just the right distance from 1 million people who live near Katy. That's what they are. Because Houstonians who live in Katy are willing to consider that a weekend trip. If they were 5 minutes closer, that might be a problem. I've been at the place where people locally, we weren't far enough away for them to think we were a trip, so they didn't come in the numbers we needed. And it's a weird dynamic, but it's a mental thing. I think it helps us with Katy people that they've now built a Buc-ee's in a place that's not a tourism place either. So you can literally get in your car in Katy, make the tourism stop at Buc-ee's 2 minutes from your driveway, and now you're already, your mindset ready to go. Speaking of which, if you've never, I was driving to Dallas with my daughter last week to deliver a car to the younger kid who's totaled a second car in college this year. And we decided, my older daughter, we were taking 2 vehicles because I was leaving one of them, right? So she said, oh, I want to stop at the Buc-ee's in Madisonville, will be our restroom stop. I said, okay, cool. I couldn't remember if I had to go north or south on 45, so I plugged it into my GPS. Do yourself the favor of listening to her pronounce Buc-ee's at some point if you have your standard iPhone GPS. All this British inserted tech, she's insistent on trying to get those 2 E's separate. So Buc-ee's, it's a little hitch there on the end. It's a fun moment of easy freebie entertainment that doesn't even involve history nerdship. So anyway, come see us, send your folks to us, have questions, yeah.
Bryan, I was going to tell you that, I don't know if this would be advantageous
Sure.
for y'all or not, but KDISD stated the district is on the 26th.
Excellent.
They normally have thousands that come, that are, teachers. And
I think our educator is booked for that. I'm not 100% sure, but I'll certainly check and make sure.
I was going to say, I don't know if Dr. Hett would give you 5 or 10 minutes?
Sure.
Because I know a lot. I know a lot of them.
Katie's an interesting market if you're not familiar with how quickly they've grown, of course. Katie has its own kind of pioneer farmstead that they use to interpret to their own students, which is a great resource. When they built it almost 20 years ago, I think, the intent was all their 4th grade schools would go there under leadership by the local teachers and their volunteers, and that's how they'd get sort of Stephen F. Austin's story. And they overwhelmed it early on. The population of that district just makes that not viable. So there's a lot of good opportunities there. Yes, ma'am.
I live in Houston.
Sure.
And I'm an etiquette coach, and a lot of my programs are in A-Leaf and Fort Bend.
Absolutely.
Right now, I am at a middle school, and they have communities in school.
Sure.
So how would it work? Because I heard you mention local schools. How would it work for like an A-Leaf? You're open
Well,
9 to 5, and
as you can imagine, the I-10 corridor is basically our bread and butter for school programming. So, we've run all these demographics. We knew this. Well, one of the things we say internally, even though the visitation doesn't support it yet, we are the best located story of the founding of Texas of anybody. I dare you to tell me it's easier to get to Washington on the Brazos or San Jacinto than it is to get off of I-10 right here and come see this new museum. Those sites get more than 100,000 visitors a year. And so we need to figure out what they're tapping into in a way that is substantive. There's a slight fear that if you weren't part of telling this story in the golden age, and the last nerdy thing I'll share with you, October 2nd is not when we start talking about this, but when we get to March, when people start talking about the fall of the Alamo and the runaway scrape, which we're central to, and the Goliad story, history people in Texas call that high holy days. No offense to anybody on the religious front, but that's kind of the core of this story. And as tourism sites, who all have seasons, we have a fall and a spring season, that's when people are doing what we do, that really hits the spring season. So if that's a story you're interested in, keep an eye on us. In terms of school stuff, I can set you up, we can get you in touch with our educator. We're doing everything we can to be viable to local schools. We were hopeful that we'd have some underwriting for all of our school visitors this year, and that hasn't developed, honestly, because our capital campaign is not over. We're still planning some things we haven't funded. And so it's been tricky to ask people for money to support our programs while we're still building. And we've got to get past that hurdle and then kind of get better in the philanthropic game. Anybody else? So I don't want to confuse anyone since I made the bold statement we're open every day. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Day. There's one more, Tony. Oh, Christmas Eve, sorry. We're closed Christmas Eve and Christmas. We're not closed Easter. In fact, if you're not familiar, if you don't, as you're learning about your community, the State Historic Site has hosted an Easter sunrise service for 80 years. And people in the state park who are staying, holidays are a popular state park camping weekend for people, especially if you think about it. There are all these immigrants. Houston is a city of immigrants, and the outskirts, all the suburbs of Houston are having this impact too. Immigrants who are away from their families feel pretty okay with going to the state park for Thanksgiving or for Easter or for whatever, because that's a way they can celebrate communally with other people. So State Park, the historic site I should say, has hosted this event in the shadow of Stephen F. Austin's statue since the 1920s. And so yes, we're open on Easter. Easter's not a big visitation day because y'all are all having ham dinner and doing whatever, but if you come to the Easter sunrise service, you might as well poke your nose in the museum. And I should have mentioned, don't hold on to your pass until November 3rd thinking you're going to pull a fast one on me and get a great deal, bang for your buck, because I've already outsmarted you. November 3rd is free, right? There is no admission to come see us on Stephen F. Austin's birthday. So use your pass on a day that there is admission and come and bypass that. Well,
they used to have reenactments out there.
They did?
Is that something that we can look forward to?
we're developing a living history module, and in fact, if that's your interest, come see us on November 3rd. We're not going to be, I hesitate how to say this. Did anybody read about the reenactment that was hosted in Cold Spring, Texas last weekend? Anybody seen that? Google that on the Houston Chronicle's website. And it's a quick education in the problem that museums like ours have. I don't say this to be critical of anyone, but in the 60s and 70s, when the Civil War was kind of a focus of reenacting, you ended up with a lot of people who had more fun dressing up and shooting guns than educating you and your kids. And that's just a reality. People get into hobbies for whatever agendas they have. So most reenacting in Texas, while there's a core educational component to it, It's been done by volunteers whose passion isn't educating people. They're not professional educators, not professional museum goers. They want to get together with their buddies, and they don't play golf. So they're going to, and that's how it goes. We really need to tell better stories than that. So we don't want to give you icing and no cake when you come to our museum. So we're working with a core group of people who have an interest in really telling substantive stories and in wearing the right stuff. You know, no offense, we used to joke when I worked at a living history site in Houston that you get to a point where if you squint, everybody's wearing the same Amish person's pants and the same little hat, and you know, pick a place, it's all the same thing. And I don't mention Cold Spring to denigrate them, but I'd never heard of this event they just had, and they've been doing it for, I don't know, 20 years. And I was stunned that this is what people are doing to celebrate history in their community, because it's so opposite of what we're trying to do. And maybe what Cold Spring needs. Again, I'm not here to judge that community. But apparently, every year at the end of September, they host a reenactment of a hanging. Which when I saw this story, I thought, it could be a little deaf-toned in the scope of things these days. But I thought, okay, there must be some crazy history in Cold Spring that I don't know, where somebody was hanged and they redo the story. No, they create a fake history story every year and they hang somebody. So this year was a woman, which they were real excited about, that they hanged for illegally preaching, right? So the concern I would have for you as an historian is that when you take the conflicts we're facing in our modern world and you try to give them roots in history, either to feel better about what you believe or to lure people to your side or whatever crazy stuff we've been smoking for the last 25 years of my adult life, it's bad for history. It's bad for you. It really is. Put down the Diet Coke, the cigarette, whatever. It's just really not what you might hope it to be. I would much rather it be touted, we're just going to have a fake history fair. We're just going to make stuff up and come to it. Go to the Renaissance Festival this weekend, right? They're going to do the same thing. So, and I go to the Ren Festival as an historian, and I've survived. I'll do all right. I will say, if I ever lead a tour for fun to a museum and you go along, I have a bit of a reputation that I'm minding. It's a 12-step sort of thing. I will not embarrass you, but I've had to learn the hard way, traveling with my kids and wife, who said, do not be that guy who asks the docent that question when they say something stupid, because they will, and my docents will say something stupid from time to time. Here's the reality. You have the keys to the kingdom. You know how to get to me. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know everything, but I'm going to tell you what we think we know, and I usually couch it exactly like that. Here's what we think we know, and here's why we think that. You may not agree. Take your own stab at it, and we'll fire away. I'll also say to you, when I took this job 10 years ago, I'd been a client of the agency before I became an employee, and I asked a guy that was upper leadership that I said, I'm thinking about making this jump, because I knew people were going to be surprised that I was going to leave what I was doing in Houston to do something like this. And he said, oh, this is great, because our agency is going to be telling the true stories. We're going to get out there and tell people exactly what happened. And I was on the phone with him and I said, whoa. I don't know those stories. Are you telling me, is there a magic box somewhere in Austin that I'm going to get like all the stories? Because I've worked in the museum field for 25 years now, and it's been a tough slog in a place that doesn't really have professional museum people on any scale. I tell people our mission is to help us all ask better questions. I don't know the answers. I can tell you the Travis letter came to the site. That's an easy fact. It's not a deep, mind-rending answer. What we're trying to do is ask better and better questions and think about how the things that happened in the past have an impact on the things we're facing today and why that should matter. Thanks for your time. Come see us at the museum.